Good morning again, everyone. I am so glad that you are here with us in this breakout session today with K12 Lift. Just a little history. So part of the focus cadre, which you got to hear some of our wonderful district representatives in the panel yesterday. There are a lot of focus cadre members in this room as well. We have really been looking at how do we change Algebra 1 outcomes for students, knowing that it is not just once they step into Algebra 1 that the fix is there. It is really a K-8 system change that needs to take place, and this isn't going to take place this year. It's going to be over the course of the next 5 to 10 years to get to those Algebra 1 outcomes. And so part of what we did when we designed it was not just thinking about how do we plan differently, but also how do we look at data differently. And that led us to an amazing partner with K12 Lift, and they have continued to push our district thinking, continue to push my thinking coming from a district, really about how we are critical consumers of the data that is put in front of us. So I'm really excited today that they are here, and without further ado, I will turn it over to Shannon and Sam.
Thank you, Caitlin. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Impact Florida, for the opportunity to present this information to you. I hope that it becomes obvious that we feel pretty strongly about effective data use in schools and districts and states, but at the risk of so that I don't sound tone deaf, I don't pretend that it's the most important thing that we do. And I definitely don't pretend that it is what education should be about. What I believe education should be about is creating as many students as the ones that we just saw and helping as many precious Simonettes and people like her to do that work. Like, that's what's important. And to the extent that data can inform that process, it's important. So is that fair table setting? Like, we believe in this stuff, but it isn't the stuff. That was the stuff. All right, I'm Sam Forster. This is my colleague Shannon Houston. We've been at this for, 5, 7, 10 years at this point. I want to start by setting some, I hope, some agreements, right? This is going to be a lot of information. It's 90 minutes. We chose not to go slowly because we only have you for this brief amount of time, and I personally come into breakout sessions wanting people to lay down some wisdom. I don't need to chat with my partner every 10, bring it. Like, I want to hear it, and I want to see it. So that's the path that we took. We recognize that that is not optimal learning practice, but this isn't a training, right? It's an introduction. That said, Shannon and I both really prefer call and respond, like to the extent that we can, turning a room into a conversation about something. In order for that to work well, we need you to respond. Okay. And we need you to respond quick. That was perfect, right? What I'm getting at is I don't want to give you the wait time. If you know it, just say it, and it'll keep the conversation moving. And the more people that shout out and offer what it is that they're seeing, the more ground we're going to cover in the 90 minutes. I don't even have to test it because you already did. That was really fun. Second thing, this is the whole deal, like learn something. Hopefully learn lots of somethings. Just lean in with some curiosity, maybe some skepticism, but that's good. That means that you're engaged. All right, so I want to start our conversation today with a story. It is a story about our third son, George. He's the rock climber, if you read the bio that we wrote for the program. And it's about a young George who was served well and then not so well by public schools and public school teachers. So George continues to be full of surprises. He was swimming like a fish at 2 years old. At 3, he started drawing. And I don't pretend that that's unique for a 3-year-old, but I mean he really started drawing. Like, this is something that he drew when he was about 4. And you'll notice the detail, the individual scales, the teeth, the perspective, the smoke wafting into the distance, like it was freaky. And then he just stopped drawing. I don't know where it came from. I don't know where it went. My point, George, full of surprises. Here's the other surprise as a parent. George did not want to read. He went into kindergarten not knowing letters, he didn't know his numbers, he didn't know his colors. Turns out he's colorblind. But we didn't know that then. All we knew is that we have this young man going into kindergarten and his brothers were reading out of preschool. So Alice and I, being the parents, we were those parents, met with the kindergarten teacher and told her, like, what's wrong with him? And she was terrific. Anybody want to guess what she said? Essentially, she said, I got it. I hear you, but I've been doing this a while, and I love it, and I'm good at it, and George is going to be fine. Being a little skeptical, Alice volunteered for the first time to be a classroom mom, right? So she's in there every week, and sure enough, she had it. Like, she just really did have it. And by the end of the year, George was doing great. All right, fast forward a few years. New district, new school, George is going into 4th grade. And we go to meet the teacher, and I meet this person, and he is fresh out of school. Hasn't taught a lick. And I had been in the public education space for about 8 years at that point, and what I had learned was teaching well is hard. It takes a minute. Even for somebody who is committed and engaged, it doesn't come right away. And it made me wonder, what should I do here? What kind of parent should I be? Should I be the dork that goes into the public record VAM data and figures out what teacher is in that school that has multiple years of high growth rates? I ultimately chose to do nothing because I didn't want to be that parent. And I liked the guy, and I wanted to extend the benefit of the doubt. And so I did. And here's how it went. This is public data. This is growth data for Georgia school, 4th grade math. So we can see right here, 4th grade math, each row is a teacher, and the scale here is years of student growth above or below typical. So in this case, a result of 0 would indicate that kids in that classroom learned on average a year's material in a year's time. Typical rate of growth, right? If I see a green bar pushing to the right, I'm at like 0.7, what does that say about the average growth rate for the kids in those classrooms? How many years of growth did they demonstrate? About 1.7? Yep. How about the bars that are pushing to the left? What does that mean about the kids in those rooms? It doesn't mean they didn't grow at all. It means they grew that much less than a year, right? So it means if the bar is pushing to, say, minus 0.8, those kids learned about 0.2 years in a year's time. Now, honestly, where do you want your kid? Which one? Teacher D, and maybe E, maybe F? Where do you not want your kid? Anybody want to guess where George was? George was in room C. Also on the public record file, they will tell you the number of students that met expectation, meaning they just grew a typical amount. 22 kids in that classroom, 21 of them failed to meet expectation. That landed hard. Like, I'm trying to make the point. It's just data until it is your kid sitting in that room. And then it matters a little more. Question is, what do I go do with this information? Like, again, am I going to be that parent? Here's the thing. George loved that teacher. I mean, loved him, like, is still one of his favorites. We'll talk about him today. There were good things happening in that room. They just weren't about 4th grade math and ELA. Like, I'm sure he learned something, but he did not learn anything about 4th grade math and ELA. I want to be fair. Classroom experience was positive. And I am certain that that teacher had no idea that the rate of growth for the kids in his classroom were that low. I'm sure that the principal didn't know either. Should we have known? We probably should have, right? But could we? This is 2016-17. So these are the days of iReady and STAR, and I'm gonna suggest that while those instruments are really good, hear me, I'm not bashing the instruments. They're highly correlated, reliable, useful, but the way that data gets reported often, it creates a false impression of success. How many of you have had the experience that you think things are going pretty well, and then at the end of the year, does not pan out, and there is heartbreak? A few of you, you've lived through it, right? As it turns out, there's a reason, right? There's a reason that that happened. It is not the quality of the instrument. It is the quality of the reporting. All right, so today's objective. I hope that you leave here feeling informed, empowered, and encouraged to challenge conventional wisdom. I hope you leave here believing that you should be a picky eater. Don't consume what everybody serves up to you, right? And I'm talking about your own assessment departments. I'm talking about the State Department of Ed. I'm talking about vendors like me, right? Like me. You should be skeptical. You should know what questions to ask and need to be convinced. I hope that we're gonna leave you here feeling prepared to do that. And maybe along the way, we solve a couple mysteries, like the one that I just mentioned about STAR and iReady, the why does it not work out like I thought it was gonna work out? And more recently, with FAST, why does it look like the bottom fell out at PM1? Why does it look marginally better at the middle of the year? And why do we end up about where we thought we were gonna be anyway? Why is that happening, right? Mystery that I hope you walk out of here, you're gonna know for sure why that's happening. All right, so two things. I forgot to mention, again, this is why Shannon's sitting on the sideline there. You will see occasionally a little icon in the bottom right of the screen. That is your cue that you have a printed version of that slide in front of you for those of you who have packets. A lot of the people at the front tables won't have packets. We printed these for the folks in the back. A lot of what we're going through today is highly visual, and if you can't see it, it's not gonna land. So we wanted to make sure that you had something right in front of you. It's also a convenient way to keep notes, questions, whatever. Yes, ma'am.
Are we gonna get a PowerPoint of this or not?
Yes, you'll also have access to the slides afterwards.
Great. Thank you for the, yes, you'll have access to the slide deck afterward.
Not every visual is in the packet. We only printed the ones that we think are key, and we want you to take them with you.
Like that screen?
This screen
I'll show you.
is not printed, but yes, that will be. But
That
yeah,
little symbol right here.
anytime you see that symbol on the screen,
But when we get it,
yes, it'll have everything.
You'll even have the picture that George drew.
great, can't wait to have that.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Okay, so here's the question. Why this objective, why now? Why this objective? I'm gonna circle back to it's not what education is about, but if we're gonna find more teachers like Precious, who are building students like the ones we saw, creating opportunities for students like that, we've gotta find them, A, and B, we've gotta know what the outcomes data looks like that tells us this is probably happening here. And if we can do that, we can also say it's definitely not happening here. I would wanna know what was happening in George's classroom early enough to do something about it. Either the teacher changes what they're doing or the kid gets turfed somewhere else where the teacher does know how to teach fourth grade ELA and math. Okay, why now? The now has to do with FAST. Like FAST it's a game changer. And not everything I'm gonna say today is gonna be complimentary of how the DOE has reported their data. But I believe what they did with FAST was visionary. Having a universal progress monitoring instrument, K12, like, oh my gosh, we can, for the first time, turn on the lights in K2. We can be building literacy and math literacy starting in kindergarten in earnest. We can do that. But as it turns out, we can only do that if we change how we think about this data from being accountability data, which is how it's provided right now, to improvement data, right? Providing it in a way that helps us to answer one simple question: is what we're doing working? Right? If I invest a ton of PD or an initiative around a group of teachers and a set of content, I should have a way to know, is that having the desired effect? And right now, that question is very difficult to answer in the way the data is reported. But the data is good. That's why now is such a terrific opportunity. All right, I'm gonna connect a dot here. Very shortly after this experience with George, we were given an opportunity as a company to do some work with 3 districts in Florida. We were given a grant, a budget, and here was the charter: help these people use their data. That was it. I know they had to write something else in the application, but what we heard was, knock yourselves out, be useful. And Shannon is gonna start taking you down that path of learning and show you some of the things that we built.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I have that? Okay, so I'm going to take you on a little journey that we went through as a company. It was the 2 of us at the time. As Sam said, we had this grant, and they said, help our districts use their data better. And so we thought, well, one of the things that we could do is make some really pretty visuals. We're good at that, so we can make it really clear what's happening in a classroom for a teacher. And that's kind of where we started. So the first question that we wanted to answer was the question that everybody is trying to answer, which is, are my students learning? Right? So we started with something pretty simple like this. This is a real classroom in Florida, a real teacher, real students. Everything is anonymized. I am calling this 5th grade math teacher Leslie Nope. Any Parks and Rec fans here? So obviously it is not a real name. And what you see here is 1 row per student, A through X, and you see their scale scores, right? Simple enough. Up in the top right corner, we see some symbols. We thought if we use these cute little symbols, we can put them on one line and make it really easy to tell what's happening with scale scores. Are students in this classroom learning? We also decided we'd use some color, so the lines are all green. I don't know if you can see that everywhere, but this is why we have the handouts. So if you are Miss Nope right now, how are you feeling? Seems good, right? I see lots of green. Actually, I see nothing but green, right? We were gonna use red for a decline in scale score, but we didn't have any. All right, and some of these seem pretty long, right? It's like 20, 30, 50 scale score points. That feels good. But is it good? It
What's
looks
that, Brett?
good.
You need a comparison. You have to compare it against something.
You have to compare it against something.
You have to compare it against something. Right, it's lacking some context, maybe, so you'd have to go look something up, right? Well, we had committed to not having teachers go look something up. We wanted something that would fit on a piece of paper. So we thought, what else could give us some context that we need?
How are other students doing that started off at that same point?
How are other students doing? So what metric allows us to see how other students, how we're doing compared to other students who took the same assessment? The state percentile. Ah, percentiles. They're reported right there alongside the scale score, but they seem to be a really well-kept secret in a lot of places. Okay, so what if we use the percentile? What does a percentile mean? Are teachers gonna know that? Are parents gonna know that? Are students gonna know that? Hopefully math teachers would know that. Absolutely. So I'm gonna prove to you that everybody in this room knows what a percentile is, even if you can't articulate it. All right, so if I am the parent of student 12, and at the beginning of the year, my student scored in the 80th percentile, where do I want my student to be at the end of the year? The 99th percentile? Where do I not want them to be? Below 80. I did not have to look up a scale score, did I? Nope. Just use that percentile. If the percentile stays the same or goes up, it means students have learned a year's material in a year's time, essentially. They have learned a typical amount. The percentile, it's so clear, right there in front of us. So what we're seeing on the right now is Miss Nope's data, same exact students, same assessment period. What has changed? You see some red, and this is now on the state percentile scale. What does that mean? What do the red lines mean? They lost ground compared to their peers. Did they learn? How do you know? The scale score went up, right? Every student in this classroom demonstrated that they learned something because their scale score went up. But now we see a few of them, their lines turned red. Does this blow anybody's mind that you can have a scale score go up and a percentile go down? It blew my mind when I first learned it. It's like I probably could have figured that out if I thought about it, but I had never seen it this way. And I thought, wow, okay. So if I'm Miss Nope, I'm a little concerned now about a few of my students. They're not maintaining pace with their peers. I'm concerned about that. But I still see mostly green, right? So I'm still feeling okay. I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, the green lines are long, right? Like my students are outpacing their peers, most of them. But we were still a little uncertain that this was really, that we were done, that this was the right view of whether students in this classroom were growing enough. We had the benefit now of looking at multiple districts' data, multiple years, and we had started to notice this pattern. When we look at student histories of where their percentiles had been, we would see many students drop over the summer from, maybe they were in the 80th percentile, and then at the beginning of the next year, they were in the 30th, 40th, 50th percentile. And we saw this over and over again, these drops. We thought, what is going on? So we asked our clients, what do you think is happening? What do you think they said? Say it again?
Summer slide.
Summer slide. It is the most common answer. But what?
When I was looking at students that were in the 80th percentile and saw that they slid, it's like, okay, are these the students that are perform their level 4s and 5s?
Maybe.
Slid back to 3s, still above, but lost ground.
We are going to get to that. You're jumping ahead in my presentation. But for now,
That's true.
summer slide. It seems to make sense. It rolls right off the tongue. Well, yeah, of course. Students dropped over the summer. They didn't have school. Okay, but remember, we're talking about percentiles. And what are percentiles? They're comparison to the norm group, right? Did most students have summer in the norm group? Probably, right? These are huge groups of students. So that can't be it. That cannot be the reason why percentile rankings are dropping. What else might account for that first assessment being too low? The grade level changed? Okay. End of grade standards.
They didn't actually learn it. They learned it long enough to take the test.
Maybe, but what we were seeing was that students would show multiple instances of achieving at a certain percentile, and then that first assessment at the beginning of the year. What time of year is that assessment given? Historically, when has it been given? August. Maybe first week of school. We got to know where these kids are. We got to take it so we can put them in groups. That's what we do, right? Are students ready to show what they know during the first week of school? No, they're rusty, right? They're rusty. Doesn't mean they didn't learn the things the year before, but maybe they're just not ready to demonstrate it. What other reason?
PM1 doesn't count. In their minds.
It doesn't count. Say more about that.
Doesn't count. Kids don't understand that we're using that data. I don't think kids understand the way we even use that data or how we use that data.
They might not think it matters.
Doesn't matter, and PM3 is the only test that's gonna matter.
Ah.
Well, I would even say for a lot of teachers, there's a lot of confusion about PM1.
Yeah.
You got on PM1, but you grow by PM3, well, I look like I did a good job.
Exactly.
I know none of you ever did that. But there might be something we'd call a perverse incentive, right? If students know it, and by 5th grade they probably do, if I don't really try that hard on this one, by the end of the year I get a pizza party or an ice cream social, or I get to use my bucks in the school store, right? Like there's an incentive. And sometimes evaluation systems are based on PM1 to PM3. That happens, right? So there are a lot of reasons why that assessment might be too low. And so we just thought, you know what? Maybe PM1's not the right baseline for us. If we're looking at percentiles, why don't we start with where the student ended the prior year? So what you're seeing now is the exact same data set, state percentiles, but now we are connecting those red and green lines from the prior year, in this case an FSA score, on that same percentile scale. Now Sam's gonna talk a little bit about how we do this mapping, but if you can trust me for a second, these are apples to apples comparisons. This is the same state percentile scale. All right, so now we can see where students were at the end of 4th grade in terms of their ranking relative to peers, and what has happened for those students over the course of 5th grade. What do you see? What's different? They lost ground. Thank you for the terminology. It doesn't mean they didn't learn, right? We saw it in the scale scores. But compared to their peer group, they are marching backwards, most of them. Do you think Miss Nope has any idea? Nope. Probably no idea. And when she sees this, if she does, and I hope that she will somehow, it's gonna hurt a little, right? Like this is not what she had hoped for when she came to work every day and put forth her best effort. But what she was probably responding to in a lot of cases was that PM1 result, the first quarter pie. What do you notice about the distance between the first quarter pie and the vertical bar? In a lot of cases, it moved back a ton, right? And she might have believed those results. She might have thought, God, my kids are so low. I gotta get them in interventions. I can't get to grade level yet. I need to go back and reteach what they should have learned last year. What is the risk of Miss Note believing this is where her students are? Never gets to grade level content? Say it again? The gaps might just grow, right? Students in this classroom didn't have the opportunity to learn from where they were. And so, if instruction was kind of pointed around here, then you're gonna see those lines drop, right? Students live into our expectations. Okay. So what we came to believe is that it is not enough to ask, are students growing? We need to be answering the question, are they growing quickly enough? We need to do that with percentile rankings and using the prior year as our baseline so that we can tell, are we moving them at the pace they need to be moved? Now, there is something still missing from this. I'm not fully satisfied because if I'm a teacher, I don't know who's proficient in this classroom. I can't tell. I still have to go look something up. I don't know who's gonna make a learning gain. I can't really tell, right? And in 5th grade math, this is important. I need to know this. So I'm gonna have to go look something up. And we thought, nope, we are doing one piece of paper. So what if we just mapped it on to that piece of paper? We can do this. We can find what the state percentile maps to in terms of a fast achievement level. So that's what we did. what can Miss Nope see now about her classroom? Let's think about where her students came into the year. What percentage of her students were proficient at the end of 4th grade? Doesn't have to be exact.
About half, a little over half. No, 2/3.
2/3, maybe even 3/4, most of them, right? Okay. Who in this classroom is growing most quickly? You'll notice it's sorted by the prior year vertical bar. I don't think I pointed that out. The bottom quartile is growing the most quickly. That's good news, right? They're probably likely to make learning gains at this rate. The thing that it takes a minute to pull it out, but what I noticed was that the proficiency rate in this classroom did not change much between 4th and 5th grade, meaning these students who came in so high, they dropped a lot, but they were still proficient. So Miss Nope, if she was just looking at her proficiency rates, wouldn't have any reason to worry. But what happens in 6th grade for these students? We got to look at it this way. Which of these do you think paints a truer picture of what's happening in Miss Nope's classroom? One of them's going to be harder to swallow, and Miss Nope's going to need some help with that. Like, there's going to be an emotional response. But we got to know, right? Sam?
Man, that was really good. Regrettably, you have me now. I promised that we would try to solve a couple mysteries. What mysteries got solved here?
Why they've ignored PM1 and PM2 data.
I'm sorry?
I said why the state's ignoring PM1 and PM2 data.
Interesting. I'm going to make a connection to that later. Yeah, I was getting at more the how could it be. Yes, Monique, please.
I think one of the mysteries is that we celebrate kids staying proficient, but we're not recognizing that they're going back in comparison to their peers.
Yep. That's one of the mysteries. Right? Our learning gains aren't as high as they could be, and they're not as high as they could be because we got these students that are 3, 4s, and 5s marching backward. Another mystery is if we're anchoring to PM1, we're going to have a false sense of what is going on in that classroom. We've got to anchor to the prior year, and then the truth becomes a little clearer. So in your packet at the end, you're going to see this table that we're going to fill out. One of the things that was super important to us is that we could generate some walkaways for you. As promised, we're going to show you some stuff that isn't great news, like it's troubling in terms of how we typically use data. But we wanted to make connections to what we can do differently that is within your power to do differently. So the first thing is the conventional wisdom. Shannon alluded to this. The conventional wisdom is I'm going to use a scale score, I'm going to watch it go up, and I'm going to answer the question, are students learning? And we would offer that instead we should use percentiles and ask the question, are students learning quickly enough? Like that has to be the instinct. Are my kids learning quickly enough? That's what we're shooting for, right? And so the benefits of that are many. One of them is that we can interpret and percentile simply. And she demonstrated that, right? With a room that said, I don't know how many people are going to be able to define a percentile. That's true. But people know if their kid's in the 80th percentile, that student should leave at the 80th or higher, right? They understand how to interpret it intuitively, and we can teach them the definition easy enough. It's a really accessible metric. Another benefit of using that metric is that it is super easy to make comparisons year over year, right? You can watch a trajectory of a student very clearly from one grade level to another. And when that transparency appears, oh my gosh, do you have moments of holy crap. I kind of knew this was happening, but now I know it's happening. The third real benefit I would suggest in using percentiles and this question of are kids growing quickly enough is that it allows you to organize a group of people, a grade level team, a school, a district, around this idea that we already hold true. That the job of a teacher is to take a student wherever they are, wherever they're coming in the room, and grow them a year, right? Give that student an opportunity to learn. They already believe this to be true. Like, there's no convincing that you have to do for a teacher to believe that's my call. The weird thing is, we've never answered the question for them, right? We've never shown them, this is how many of your kids are succeeding at that metric. We just haven't talked about it like that. And as Shannon mentioned, I want to make super clear, you do not organize information like this and put it in their inbox. You don't drop it in the, hey, pick this up with whatever else they needed to, for God's sake, no. Right? Because if you have people that are concerned about what they're doing, and I believe the vast majority of people are, and come to work to do good work, it is hard to look at that the first time. And our advice is be prepared for that. Like, go through your own mourning process a few times. And then gradually walk into this idea that we should be able to answer this question, and we need to. Second really big idea, measure growth relative to prior year. The conventional wisdom, of course, is PM1. Connect to the prior year. That's going to give you a couple benefits. One of them is fewer false signals of success. You're much less often are you going to be celebrating something that is fiction. Other thing that it will provide for you is fewer heartaches at the end of the year. Like, you're going to have a much clearer picture at the middle of the year how things are going. Third big idea, Shannon alluded to this, traditional wisdom, test as early as we can in August. I think this is an artifact of having had the online instruction component, right? And several of the products that are popular. You got to test them. You use that score as the anchor for putting them on the learning path, et cetera, et cetera. As it turns out, that's less relevant now because PM1 is the metric, and it may or may not be connected to anything like that. But also, for reasons that Shannon, I thought, did a great job of sort of illuminating, that data point is typically pretty unreliable. Not always, but often. So why test early? Give yourself some time, let the student get comfortable, let the relationship with the teacher build, and if you wait later into the window, it might actually be useful. So that's our advice. Okay, so this is how this sort of spun out for us. Like, after the first couple, hey, wait a minute, maybe we should do this differently. We realized that opened all kinds of opportunities for presenting data that is super useful to the intended audience. So this one, the intended audience is a teacher. And this is what we would call a classroom profile. I am encouraging you, I realized I didn't say something at the beginning and I super really meant to. I never use the word super really. I sound like Britney Spears. Okay, let's pretend I didn't say that. Let's say I had intended, with the introduction of our objective, to make it clear that I am not in this room, and I hope that you believe me, to sell you something. I am not here to sell you a product. I am here to sell ideas. Many of you have assessment departments that are very capable organizations, right? Diana's nodding her head. Palm Beach, yes. Yes, we have that kind of group. I am hoping that you take these ideas and become a sophisticated consumer. You look at a report and say, I don't think this is answering the question that we should be asking. I think we should ask this question, and I need your help to answer it that way. That's my intent. My advice is that if you start reporting results in terms of percentile rankings, you can get to something like this, that is one sheet of paper that tells a really big story for a teacher. What do you guys see in this visual that is new information? And what do you wonder about it? You see student demographics data. Why do you think we put the demographics data on that piece of paper? What does that allow the teacher to begin to do? What's up?
Monitor sub-ops, making sure that they're not going backwards.
That's it, right? Starting to look for patterns. With whom am I successful? And with whom am I least successful right now? Right? We can start to ask those questions. What else do you see that's different or new?
To me, an individual student report, I cannot say in the county that I work at, that in any given year, I've seen an individual breakdown like that, a detailed report like that of every single student I have. Could I get it? Sure, but I would spend a long
Yep.
time looking at it.
Yeah,
Just
so
that alone.
that alone, right? It's right there and I don't have to go chase it. I don't have to request it. This is what I mean about sophisticated, picky eater consumer. Now that you've seen it, want it. Go ask for it. Make the case. Like, if you walk away from here really understanding how this helps you, either as a teacher, understand how to serve your kids better, or as a principal, how to counsel your teachers better, make the argument. So we've heard that we have subgroup data, and that helps us to understand who we're serving well and not well. We've heard that just having all of the students on one sheet of paper, helpful, allows us to see patterns. What else? What else do you see that is either new or different? Prior year proficiency level. So why do you think that column is in there if it's already offered as a, in this case, it's prior year FSA? But you've already got that line in there. Why would we need both of those things? That seems odd to me. It seems duplicative. Yes?
You could use that to place for your tiered interventions, the low to highs, your bubble kids, and all those different pieces.
Yes. I'm getting at the why do we have that? It seems like a duplication. We've got that piece of information there twice. Why would we show you graphically where it is, right? I mean, give you an example. If I see this vertical bar here, what achievement level was that student in the prior year, we think? A 5, right? Why do I need to tell you it's a 5 here?
Well, as these looks like the ones, you're splitting it into the subcategories of level ones, right?
Definitely. Excellent, Diana. Diana's pointing out that at least for the students that are level 1 and 2, there's additional information in there. But I would offer, we've already got those lines in here in the achievement levels also. It may not be clear on the screen, but those cut points are already reflected. So again, you want me to give it to you so we can move on? These cut points that you're looking at on this visual are for 5th grade math. 4th grade math's cut points are different. They're not usually different by much, but they're different. So sometimes the achievement level of the student on the 4th grade cut points is not what we would interpret looking at it on the 5th grade cut points. This becomes important when you're calculating learning gains, right? So that's why that column's there. For purposes of moving on, I want to expound on something I heard somebody say about growth indicators. You guys notice growth indicators? All right. No. Before I talk about that, what do you notice that's different about this visual and Leslie Knope? I'm going to go back to Leslie Knope. This is Leslie Knope, right-hand side. Imagine the conversation you're having to prepare for with Leslie Knope. And now let's go to here. Ben Wyatt. What do you notice that's different? It's all, yeah, right? It was so obvious a question, you thought I was trying to trick you. I wasn't trying to trick you. This is the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of what you see sometimes when you were looking at data this way. Mr. Ben Wyatt's outcomes are frickin' awesome. I would offer that this is the goal, right? If you want to know that the training or support that you're offering to a teacher is having the desired effect, if you see this kind of growth in your kids, whatever you're doing is working, right? I mean, how many of these students are growing a year's material in a year's time? That's growth indicator number 1. All but 2. And what's the percentage? It's 91% because we give it to you in the header. And if you want to know how we're calculating that 91%, that's what the numerator and denominator columns are, right here, right? This is growth indicator number 1, numerator, denominator, numerator, denominator. So you guys are, I'm sure, familiar with how school grades get calculated. We're just telling you, for every kid, yes, they were included in the denominator, and they met the criteria for that growth indicator. So we see a classroom where 91% of the students have a green line, which is to say their percentile ranking is staying the same or going up. This is a terrific place to start. But here's my question to you. Is maintaining a percentile ranking always quickly enough? I hear no. Why not? Give me an example of when maintaining a percentile ranking is not quickly enough.
Because if they started high and didn't grow at all, they still didn't grow. No, because that's not a year's worth growth. Hang on.
If you already start below grade level and you just hit 1 year's break.
There it is. That's where you were going, right? It's the opposite end of the spectrum, right? If you have a student that comes in at the 10th percentile, they could even make it to the 12th percentile. They're still a low-level 1 or a mid-level 1, and that's not enough. And I mean, it's not enough for school accountability purposes, but it's just not enough. They're never gonna make it to proficiency, probably. And that's the point, right? This is the idea of organizing a group of people around this question of quickly enough. It's really easy to say, and it's not that hard to think through, right? I mean, if our kids are on grade level or above, at a minimum, maintain that percentile ranking. I would argue the definition should be that a 3 should be a 4. Because as we all know, 3 does not mean you're proficient. 3 means you count for proficiency. It does not mean that you're proficient, right? So here's the cool part. If you have assessment groups that are gonna build things like this for you, you get to come up with these definitions. My point is, have them. Like, have the conversation and orient your thinking around how many of our kids are growing quickly enough. That's a vastly more satisfying measure than how many of our kids are proficient. I say it's vastly more satisfying because every kid matters, every one of them. Doesn't matter what end of the spectrum they're on, all of them count. And I think that does good things for how we think about, how we plan for instruction.
Well,
So,
it can change the conversation you're having with the teachers too.
totally.
Because as teachers, we're so focused, like, what's my school grade gonna be? Are we gonna be an F? Are we gonna be under state oversight? So like separating those two growth indicators of, okay, your kids are fine, our school grade is fine because of your kids, but, and it's that kind of, like, I just think that conversation then goes so much easier, like, all right, let's take the state stuff off the table, we're fine there. Now we need to focus on growing the kids, which is what we're missing.
Yes.
So I just sent her a message, sorry, we work in the same district, and I was like, this would be such a great tool for even principals of high-performing schools where teachers say,
Oh my gosh.
so awesome.
Now, I want to tell you a thing I think is true. I'm going to tell you a thing I think is true. If you are in a district that has high-performing schools, the leaders whose heads will explode when they see their data for the first time this way are the ones that are in high-performing schools. Because those schools, to this point, have largely gotten a pass. They have largely benefited from kids that literally come in the door in kindergarten so far ahead that it takes years and years and years for many of those students to march backward. The process happens so quickly that in many cases, those kids even still earn learning gains in some years. Like, those are the people whose heads will explode. Our experience is that the principals in lower performing schools, quote, lower performing schools, it just gives them insight that is super helpful in conversations with teachers. Like, maybe what we're doing here is almost self-defeating. This unproductive focus toward the middle is not actually serving anybody well. Yes, ma'am.
I was just thinking about this being used with students as well. Like, we're always we're implementing more data chats knowing that when students know where they are and
Yeah.
where they need to be, it's helpful to them.
Yeah.
So this is, of course, you would show them other student data, but like just a clear representation of,
It's clearer. Yeah.
because even when we tell them like, you know, we need you at a 3, which is this scale score, it's like those are numbers that don't really mean anything, but saying that
Right.
how close you are to it this way versus
And in fairness to the student, she said sometimes we talk about scale scores and so many points and it's not meaningful to the student. I would argue it's not meaningful to the teacher either, or the parent, right? I mean, we're just trying to provide context that makes it clearer in terms of whether or not they're learning quickly enough and how far they have to go to get to proficiency or actual proficiency, level 4. Okay, so I think we landed the point. I mean, the deal is if you are looking at the data this way, you can start thinking about setting goals that are around growth indicators instead of percent proficient. How many of my kids are learning a year's material in a year's time? How many are learning quickly enough? You even have, in the second one, you have some liberty as to what that definition would be. So keep going. All right, so in your chart that you'll get here, that's the big idea number 4. Setting improvement goals around percentages of students and the rates at which they are learning. All right, moving on. This gentleman brought up school grades in the conversation. Do you think it's important to connect the conversations you're having with teachers about growth and school grades? Come on, let me hear it. Is it important or is it not important, and why?
Because that's what they're concerned about.
Are the teachers concerned about it?
They are because their leaders are.
That's a different thing. Are they intrinsically concerned about it?
No, not intrinsically. Yeah. But when my principal is like, or my leaders are focused on that,
Yep.
and holding me to that, then I make the connection
Yeah.
that I have to influence that, right?
Yes. So I am encouraging us all to think about how we can decouple those things. And this gentleman alluded to how we can do that. You can have feedback to a teacher that has nothing to do with school grades. It has to do with the mission of 100% of your kids should be growing quickly enough. Let's talk about what that means and how we get there. It doesn't have to have a thing to do with school grades. However, to your point, school grades matter to the people running the buildings and the people running the people that run the buildings and the people that support the people that are running the buildings, right? It's a currency in Florida that is important whether we want it to be or not. So my point is, if you were going to predict school grades, I'm going to show you how I would do it if I were you, right? If you were going to go to your people and say, let's do it like this, I'm going to show you how I would do it. I would use this chart, which is just a mapping of the achievement levels on FAST in terms of percentile rankings. And I know I'm going to go fast here, but it comes from here. So this is the retrofitted data file for PM3 for 22-23. If you're in a district of any size, you're going to have a lot of matched pairs that tell you this scale score is this percentile at PM3. You with me so far? If you have those matched pairs, you can do the curve fits. You can find the cut points in terms of scale scores because those are public record. They're sitting right there, and you end up with this table. Like, it takes some doing, but it isn't rocket science. It's a relatively straightforward process. Once you've done that, then you can build a report that looks something like this. And this is principal facing, regional superintendent facing. This is the how is this playing out in terms of school grades. What do you notice that's different in terms of information that's being reported here? This part probably looks really similar, should look really similar. What's on the left-hand side of the page that you notice is different? Anybody?
It's all the categories for school grade that you calculate.
That's it. And it's explicit, right? So these columns are the numerators and denominators for the achievement components, the learning gains components, and the learning gains lowest performing quartile component. If a student has a symbol, LQ, it means that the two surveys indicate that, and the prior year results indicate that kid's gonna be in the lowest quartile. If they have a LG, that means that student is going to be in the learning gain denominator. If they've got an ACH, it means that they are going to be in the achievement denominator. All the other stuff that is to the left are reasons that they might not be in one of those categories, right? Again, we're just trying to organize it so that, A, you don't have so many principals and coaches wasting so much precious time trying to get this answer. And B, they're not wasting their time chasing down data to do that calculation. A, they're not doing it at all. B, they're saving a lot of time that they don't have to spend trying to find information that tells them why a kid is not in the achievement component. Look at this record right here, student H. Why is that student in the learning gains denominators, but not in the achievement denominator? That's it. We can see that student has an ELL code of LY. They're in country less than 2 years. Okay, I get it. They're not in the achievement denominator, so that student wouldn't be counted. Why is that student not incorporated in the numerator? We don't see check marks for that student. Why not? How do you know that? Yep. So we can see the symbols here, and we can see, it's hard to see obviously because it's so collapsed, but they haven't grown quickly enough to earn a learning gain yet. They haven't made it from the low level one to the mid level one. That's why they don't count. All right, my point in showing you this is that if you have this grade level detail, every kid on your roster has been accounted for in this way, then you can end up with a school grade estimator that looks like this. And this is, it's the whole thing, right? I mean, up here we see the percent of total points earned. I apologize for this. AP1 and PM1 are interchangeable in this case, right? So this is saying that at AP1, if we look across all the ELA and math components for the school, that school is projected to earn 49 points out of 100 on their school grade. And by AP2 or PM2, they're projected to earn 54 points. So that school has improved considerably from the first assessment period to the second. That's what it tells you. These categories will look familiar to you, right? They're just the school level components, and they've all been tabulated. And then you can break them out by grade level. And you've already got the student, like, you seeing where I'm going here? If you're problem solving from the perspective of a district leader or a principal, you got it. But if it were me, I would never put this in front of a teacher because they don't care or they don't want to care. So I heard somebody say they shouldn't care. I kind of agree, right? I don't want them to care about a school grade. I want them to care whether or not the students in their room are learning quickly enough. That's the point, right? Their bosses and their bosses' bosses get paid to deal with accountability. So I mentioned that these visuals are designed for specific audiences. That's what I mean, right? There's a lot of the same information on these things, but they point to different things. Any questions before we go? Yes, ma'am.
I do understand and agree what you're saying. However, I think we've always been big on setting goals. How do you set, if you're not setting goals because you want every kid, does this mean we don't set goals anymore?
Such a good question. Such a good question. So the question is, are you suggesting that we not set goals? It's an important part of the process. I am absolutely advocating that you set goals, and I am absolutely advocating that you set ones that are realistic. So to give you an idea, when you look over thousands of these classroom profiles, that is the accounting of a teacher's classroom growth rate, 80% for either of those growth indicators is like a ninth stay 9 outcome. It is extraordinarily rare. We can come up with a few reasons as to why that is. Like, it's unlikely that every student is going to grow so much that that result is more positive than the error associated with a measurement. Right? It's just not likely. So 80% is the very top line. Thank you for checking me on the hyperbolic speech here. You can't reasonably ask for somebody to do what Ben Wyatt did. It just doesn't, it's a statistical anomaly. What you can ask for, 60% good enough? 70% good enough? Right?
And you're talking about growing quickly enough
Yes.
Proficiency. I think that
That's,
would be the question.
that's the point. We're setting goals around what percentage of your students are growing quickly enough, as opposed to how many of them scored 3 or higher on the assessment. Absolutely have the goal-setting conversation. Just set goals with a different metric is our advice. Yes, sir. Sir, you.
Is any of your data impacted because of the difference in the teachers themselves? You're asking that the baseline data taken from the 4th grade and be applied to 5th grade level. If there's a difference between the teachers, does that skew any of this?
Can somebody rephrase the question? I want, after having answered the wrong question last time, I want to make sure I'm trying to answer the right one this time. Somebody tell me what you think you just heard in the way of a question.
Does the comparison not feel valid because you're not comparing the same teachers? So is it more of like an apples to oranges comparison than an
Because
apples
you
to
were the
apples?
person that did whatever happened at the end of.
Okay, so I'm going to take a stab at it, and you tell me if I got close. The idea is that because you are using a result from a prior teacher's experience as the baseline and using a result from the current teacher's experience in the current year, that there might be some error and the conclusion that we're drawing. Is that the question?
There might be some skewing because of that. Because if the teacher that taught you in the 4th grade is going to be a 4th grade teacher,
Yeah.
the teacher that's using the 4th grade data in the 5th grade,
Yeah.
the first year teacher.
Yeah, so that is going to show up in what is happening in 5th grade. The idea of using the prior year result isn't that it's tied to a given teacher, it's tied to an outcome for the kid. Like regardless of what the teaching experience was for that student in 4th grade, that's where they landed. And that's the starting point, right? And so the 5th grade teacher has to pick up the baton right there and keep rolling. Monique, yes?
What I was going to say, it is important to use that previous year score so that you know what they did in 4th grade and how are you going to help them make that year's worth of growth from where they were.
Where they were, yes.
And a lot of teachers like to say, I got them low. I said, okay, make a year's worth of growth from the low. You know, I want you.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not trying to make you go from a level 1 to a level 5.
Yep.
You know, take away that excuse. But look at where if they were a low level 1 in the grade before you, what kind of value can you add to them so that they're not a low level 1 again?
That's the question.
Which is
That's
shifting a mindset around how we use the data. It's not evaluative. It's about the growth of a student and the outcome of the student, not tied to who I am as a teacher and my evaluation and my school grade. It's for the use of teaching.
yes. Yes. I would keep everything that we just showed you a million miles away from an evaluation system. Like, honest to goodness, if you want this information to be toxic, mix the two. If you want it to be something that can guide a really helpful conversation around our collective responsibility of moving kids from where they came in to at least a year down the road. If they came in under grade level, then making sufficient progress toward proficiency. If you want to have that conversation, I'm coming back to the do not commingle it with school grades, with evaluation. It isn't about that. What we're trying to get at is people's hearts, right? Why they came to teach anyway. You use the term value add. They want to invest in the students that are in their room, and I think they will. But can you imagine a system that is reacting to false positive information chronically? What is going to happen there?
Welcome to our district.
All right. Yes, Brett.
Curiosity. In mathematics, typically in middle school, that's where students all of a sudden go into different acceleration
Yep.
areas. And I'm thinking about that one student that took a 6th grade assessment the prior year, and now they're taking the 7th accelerator, which is the 8th grade. So they now changed peer groups. And so now they're in that group where it's all mostly 8th graders, and then those few students
Yep.
accelerated. So they were at the 80th percentile before, now all of a sudden they're 98th percentile. Because they've also moved
Actually, they won't go from the 80th to the 90th. Did you guys hear the question? Okay, so there's a complication associated with using percentile rankings when you have kids that are not tracking with their age cohort, right? You're changing the age cohort, which means that that scale score now means something different in the way of a percentile, and the impact actually goes in the opposite direction. What happens is that a student that could have been in the 85th percentile in 6th grade is now, I'm not making this up, like 35th or 40th percentile when they're taking the 8th grade math class next year. They didn't actually lose ground. They're being compared to a different group. And originally we thought, oh my God, this is problematic. We got to do something about this. Like there's something wrong with our data reporting. And as it turns out, there's nothing wrong with the data reporting. We have to understand that when we accelerate that student because we think they can do that work, we just stacked the deck against them and the teacher in this way. Now, they've got 40 percentile points to make up just to get to the same place in that peer group as they were in their age cohort. Does that make sense? Yeah. We're getting weedy here. But it's something that is revelatory. Like when you start thinking about it and looking at it this way, it makes you wonder, when is the right time to accelerate a kid? Like what are we actually doing that is unintentional? Brett, thank you for the question. I'm gonna ask for how much time do we have? All right, so we have 25 minutes, and we have 2 big bodies of content that we could talk through. And I don't think we're gonna do a good job with both of them. One of them is, if I were you, I would think that I am full of crap about the school grade projections. I would want some evidence that what I am suggesting that you do in the way of percentiles actually works. And so we have prepared a number of slides that demonstrate how this worked in 22-23, like groups of schools, how DOE is projecting, how we projected, who was closer. It's great fun, and it's validating to me. So it's a good time for me. However, the second part is about K2, right? I feel like the opportunity FAST puts in front of us is being able to seamlessly report data in those early grades through 3rd grade, so that for the first time ever, for real, game on in kindergarten. It matters from day one. Getting that to happen is really complicated. And I can't even, with the extra time today, I wouldn't be able to get through all of it, but I feel like there are some important things to talk through there. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to pick one or the other, or do you want me to go fast through both? Interesting. Who wants me to go fast on both? Who wants me to do K2 only? I appreciate. All right, we have 25 minutes. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you just enough that I hope you're going to be convinced that the school grade projection thing actually works. But I'm not going to keep slamming the nail. I'm going to move on to K2 as quickly as I can. Okay, so in one of the districts that we were supporting this year, not surprisingly, they look at, this is a real clip from their school grade estimator, and they realized that we were projecting 37% and 26% proficient in math for them across 3 grade levels. This is what they were seeing in the FAST dashboard, 7% and 9%. Now, they were happy to have the better news, but they were reluctant to believe it. Like, how is it that yours are 20 points higher? How can both of these things be true? So, what we did for them, and what I'm proposing to do for you, is just quickly take you through, here's how DOE is doing it, and here's how it works with percentile rankings, and here's which one was closer. All right, you guys probably know this, so I'm gonna go super fast. This is how DOE is doing it. They're taking for any given kid a scale score, and they're mapping it to the cut points, right? So in this case, it's a PM2 result. They're mapping to a PM3 cut point. 200 points for 5th grade math is a level 1. That's what we see showing in the column there. 225 is a level 3. You get the idea, right? That's what they do. Okay, if you do it like that, this is what, for a cluster of elementary schools, their PM1 result looked like. And this is hard to see. Shoot, and we didn't print this one. Do you see the blue quarter pies?
Yes.
All right, what is the average result for math in terms of percent proficient for this cluster of schools? Ballpark. I'd say maybe even 5 for math, and maybe closer to 10 or 12 for ELA. Is this consistent with your results for your Title I schools? At PM1, were you seeing that your percent proficient was close to 0? Yes. All right, did you panic? Yes. You didn't. All right, we had a few that said, nope, this can't be true, and I'm not listening to it. There are a bunch of people whose jobs are on the line for accountability that were, I want to use expletives, and I promised that I wouldn't because there are cameras. They were blah, blah, blah bricks. Yes, thank you, Brett. All right, the question is, was this prediction close, right? So I'm going to put a second data point on the plot here. This vertical bar, that's the actual outcome at the end of last year for those same schools. Was the PM1 accounting out of DOE's website remotely close to what happened at the end of the year? It really wasn't, right? Okay, does that mean the DOE's calculation is wrong? Tell me more. How can it be that goofed up and not be wrong? That's awesome. Say more about that. They weren't predicting. That wasn't the point. Yep. Fair enough. So what was DOE's intent, would we speculate? Interesting. Interesting. So the speculation is that they wanted to show lots of growth from PM1 to PM2 to PM3. I don't know if you're right or wrong. I really don't. I think it's plausible. Cynics think you're right. So the thing about the way that they're doing it, by taking an earlier result and mapping it to a PM3 cut point, the assumption that they're making is that if the student took the end of year assessment right now, that's where they would be. And to your point, of course they're not going to be proficient. They haven't had a year's worth of instruction yet. All right? I'm going to say it in a way that's more ridiculous when you think about trying to use that metric to predict school grades. And admittedly, that was not their point. But if you were doing it that way to predict school grades, your baked-in assumption would be, if my kid, in fact, all of my kids, learn nothing from now to the end of the year, that's my school grade. If they learn nothing more, they test that same scale score at the end of the year, this is my grade. Is that helpful to you? No. How is it destructive? Panic, stress, right? Oh my God, what does this mean? What do you think it does to a parent? To get something in the mail, their kid's been a level 3 or 4 forever, now they're a level 1, new assessment. I'm gonna guess they're gonna come to the wrong conclusion. There's nothing wrong with their kid, right? It's kind of a weird way to report the result. So our wondering was, how can we use percentiles to answer a different question, which is, given the results at PM1, if my kids just learn at a typical rate between now and the end of the year, what's the school grade gonna be? Does that seem like a more reasonable, just a typical amount? And all that assumption translates to, technically, those students maintain their percentile ranking. If that student experiences typical learning, their percentile ranking will stay the same through PM2, through PM3. Now we can estimate a school grade. So that's the way using the percentiles works, right? I'm gonna go right back to the data reported by DOE in the spreadsheet. You pick up one scale score. What does a 214 mean at PM2 in the way of a percentile ranking? This is the part that's not obvious. It isn't reported. But if you have worked through to build out the norm curves for FAST and the Florida percentile rankings, so norm curves are just a relationship between a percentile and a scale score at a specific point in time. That's what they are. And so we did that. And these are the norm curves for 5th grade math, 22, 23. We've got 3 of them. We've got one for AP1, AP2, AP3. I love putting this visual in front of people because it concretizes something that is elusive and that is that a scale score doesn't mean the same thing at different times of the year. Let me go at it two different ways. What scale score does a student need to stay in the, or to be in the 50th percentile at AP1? About, yep. Whoops. So we're talking right about here, 50th, so just over 200. How about PM2, AP2? What scale score do they need? 210-ish. How about at PM3? 225, right? The expectation is that scale score goes up. The middle of the pack moves, kids learn. That's what that means. Let's look at it a different way. Let's take that 214 score that we were talking about. 214 at AP2 points to what? Ish. 55, it turns out to be 57. But what would that 214 point to at PM1? Meaning, what percentile ranking would a student be in if they scored 214 at PM1? Oh my gosh, right? 70 something? And what would that same score be, imply in terms of percentile ranking at PM3? Time matters. It matters a lot. All right, so what we're doing is taking the scale score, we're mapping to a norm curve. We go back to the thing I mentioned here, our little rainbow chart that we've come up with, and what does the 57th percentile point to in terms of achievement level for math in 5th grade? Level 3, right there. So, level 3. If we do the same thing for these other data points, we map these achievement levels, what do you notice is different between what's reported on the DOE spreadsheet here and what we're coming up with in terms of percentiles? Everything's higher by about an achievement level. How can that be true? How can we be coming up with a different answer? What's up? That's, the assumption is different. The assumption is different, right? What's being reported at DOE is if the kid took the test right now, what would they score? And they are doing that accurately, right? It's not wrong. That's just what it means. We're asking a different question. What are they likely to be at the end of the year, right? Okay, so that's how both of those things are true. I promised I'd go quick. Here's the punchline. Do you guys see the little gray circles? That's what the percentile estimates were at PM1. Who's closer to what actually happened at the end of the year? The DOE estimate, which is blue, or the percentile estimate, which is gray? Percentile estimate, I'm gonna go right through this. What we found is that the percentile estimate in this cluster of schools, 23 times out of 24, was the closer estimate. And even though it was higher every time, it still undershot the actual outcome for the school, 19 cases out of 24. To convince you this wasn't just this cluster of schools, we ran it for middle schools, we ran it for other clusters of elementary schools, the outcomes are exactly the same. The trends are exactly the same. It isn't magic, it's that we're answering a different question. We don't wanna know what's our school grade if the kids took the test today. We wanna know what's our school grade if we continue to learn a year's material in a year's time from this point forward. Are you convinced? Can I go to 2nd grade? Yes. All right. Okay, someone alluded to the need to be able to do this at the student level. Like being able to see multiple years of data on one visual that tells a story. Do you see the ELA data for this student, Mr. Torres? 1st grade, where did Mr. Torres enter 1st grade in terms of percentile ranking? Well, yeah, it depends on which question you're asking, I guess. All right, if we look at the open circle, the progress monitoring result from the prior year, that student's result coming out of kindergarten had them at the 42nd percentile. AP1, 45th percentile. What happened over the course of that 1st grade year for that student in ELA? What was the word? Regressed, right? Does it mean that that student didn't learn? It isn't what that means at all. I am sure that that student learned something in 1st grade. but that student didn't learn enough somethings to keep them in the same standing with their peers. What happened in second grade? Do you guys notice anything peculiar? He regressed again more. What else do you notice about PM1 for this student? In second grade, PM1 is the one piece of pie, circle right there. Okay, go with me on this. If the normal in a district is not to provide the prior year score for a kid, if the normal is for that teacher to have only that first result for this student in ELA, what does that teacher think that student's ability is? Very low. 5th percentile, 3rd percentile, something. Is that true? Arguably not, because there are 3 data points from the prior year that would suggest it's not even close to true. But what happens, this is the tragic part, I hope this hurts a little. What happens if that teacher believes it's true? Expectations are lower, so now it is true that that kid is here-ish going into 3rd grade. This is the thing, right? This is the opportunity. If we can help people to see where and why this is happening, we can keep this in 3rd grade from having to happen. We picked this one because it's hopeful, right? We see a result that seems optimistic, like that 3rd grade teacher might pull this off. That kid might actually be proficient by the end of the year. But I'm telling you, we handpicked this one. It's not what they usually look like. If you allow 2 years of regression like that, it is really hard for a teacher to move a classroom of kids that much. So here's my thing. How much time do I have? Okay. I'm still gonna have to just give you the punchline. Here's the thing. To do a visual like this, that data all has to be on the same scale. And that scale is the state percentile scale, right? It's the scale that is reported by Cambium. That's the state percentile scale. But do you guys know that STAR does not report a Florida percentile? They report a national percentile or a Florida modified national percentile. But it's not a Florida percentile. And I impart on you how different those are, right? Would it surprise you to know that I am in the 95th percentile for height? I am 5'9", 5'8.5". Would it surprise you to know, in the spirit of being a discriminating consumer of information, anybody here have some doubts? All right, I am in the 95th percentile for height in the Philippines. I am in the 50th percentile for height in the United States. I am 5'9" either way. But the percentile ranking comes out very, very different. And that is my point. You cannot combine the national percentile rankings coming out of STAR and the Florida percentile rankings coming out of Cambium. They're not the same metric. They both end with percentile, but they're not the same. To find the same, you've got to come up with a way to map what is in STAR, the curves for STAR, and the actual Florida percentiles. And just for illustration, I wanted to point out how different these can be. So these are the 4 norm curves for the August-September timeframe is the gold line, gray is December, blue is January, May is green. These are the relationships between STAR national percentile and FAST score for STAR, right? Here's where Florida's percentile ranking comes in. The pink line, that's the actual Florida percentile ranking. Is the pink line and the green line remotely the same relationship? It's not even close. Turns out we in Florida are way better in 1st grade math than the national normed peer group in STAR. So, in order to get it on a Florida percentile scale, you gotta do a lot of maneuvering. It's not impossible, but it's involved. My plea to you is that it's worth it, right? When you can get to the story that can be told, I'm fast forwarding, here. If you can help K2 teachers see clearly whether or not their kids are growing quickly enough, I think it'll be worth the lift. So last bit on the chart here. Accountability begins in 3rd grade. That's the way it's always been. We're suggesting use the state percentiles so that that conversation can start in earnest. In kindergarten through 2nd grade, the march toward proficiency starts. Kindergarten, it matters, day 1. That's our what we are advocating. Okay, it is so warm in here, at least I think it is. We are at the end. I'm wondering, can you tell me, this is the blurb that we put in the program. We promised you that you can expect to walk away feeling troubled by the conventional wisdom and hopeful that there are things you can do to make this better. Did we hit the mark? Yes. Awesome. Awesome. As a parting gift, oh, Shannon has it. As a walkaway, in addition to the packets that you already have, I realized if there are 2 things that you take away from this, just 2, we've covered a bunch of ground, but if there are just 2, one of them is this chart as a visual cue to remind you the question is, are our students growing quickly enough? And the metric is the state percentile ranking. Like if we have one habit of practice that we can change, if we move away from scale scores to state percentiles and quit asking the question, are they growing, and start asking the question, are they growing quickly enough, and know what that means in terms of the achievement level tiers, huge, huge, huge. The second on the back of this gift, I'm calling it a gift because it's indestructible paper. Do you guys know that such a thing exists? Dinah, did you know? You did know. I didn't know there is paper that is waterproof and tear-proof. And baby books are made out of, yeah. So what you may be tempted to do when you get out of here is like, yank on it. It doesn't tear, but it will ruin it. Like it will be all crumpled and messy. And I've already done it for you. I'm telling you, you won't be able to tear it, but it is kind of fun. The reason I wanted to give you something that is indestructible is that I hope that it stays with you for a long time. I hope it lands on your desk. I hope you put a coffee cup on it. And I hope when you look at this particular visual, it brings back the idea that we can be crystal clear about what awesome looks like in the way of data that tell us kids in a classroom are growing quickly enough. And not some kids, in this case, almost all kids. Regardless if they were ELL, came in low, didn't matter. Every kid in that room had an opportunity to learn. That's the goal. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, our room captain. Thank you all.